Does anybody have a favorite day for if we do a movie thing at the end of February or March? Is there any day that's better than another? Or worse than another? What's that?
The first 3 Sundays in March.
Bad or good?
They're bad. Well, I'm just going to be gone, but I don't want to. I don't want to get.
When you only have 4 or 5 people coming, it's important to get everybody. So you want to try the last Sunday in March?
That'd be great.
Okay. Tentatively, we'll put it there. And what we'll do is, what we talked about, we'll do the movie here. I'll bring lawn chairs so you want to sit on the feet. See what we can do.
My son, he never usually says, well, you know, we don't have a DVD player. I don't know what it is, what happened to it. And it was several years ago that I brought it home and gave it to him, but I've never seen it either.
Well, we still got plenty of material.
I will be over there and I'll run through whatever I
can. We still have the 3 hours of Holocaust and then on PBS.
If you get me the details, drop the announcement.
What time is it? Actually, we're going to do it after our service.
So like we have one right now.
To see the whole thing, because we're going to do like one forecast and maybe another one. We're going to have a discussion.
Do some dancing, but I'm not sure.
And I think that's instead of going to my cottage, I think I'm going to start going to here, because that way it's American TV and the other
Get the mouse back.
Yeah, I got here because I was in the library when it came out. I booked up for like 20 years. I'm sure all that's petered out. Now I can get a copy from the yeah, that actually, I think there's a PBS thing on
Is there really?
Yes.
It wouldn't surprise me. It was award-winning book.
Yes, and I remember seeing the documentary. We may have 2 weeks, 2 Sundays, we will. Is it a movie theater? All right. Welcome to First Universalist Church of New Madison on this, seems like spring to me. I didn't realize it was still like 20 degrees out because it feels a lot warmer than that. It's like we didn't have winter. They had like 1 week of winter for the whole winter, which doesn't say we can't still get a blizzard, but for those who are climate deniers, you know, just wake up. So, all right. Do we have any announcements? One is we've talked about having a movie night, movie afternoon now. We're looking at the last weekend in March. We're going to have it at the church after church, but it's going to be kind of a walk-in, walk-out, whatever. We're going to do it. It's going to be based on the Holocaust, the PBS series on the Holocaust. They had a 3-hour presentation. There's another presentation that was on PBS called Treblinka, which is a very moving presentation. And then we're going to see if we can find some material on Mouse, the award-winning cartoon that a lot of conservatives didn't want kids to see because of one picture, an artistic drawing, a cartoon's drawing of the people being tortured. They thought that was too traumatic for children. So we'll discuss that too. But anyway, there's tons of material. So basically, as long as people want to stay, we'll keep going through material, but you can come in anytime. If you want to come in late, you can leave anytime. We'll have pizza, some veggies, some snacks, and soda pop. It's up to Chaz. We can have beer in church. It won't bother me. Or we could step outside and have a tip and then come back in. However you want to do it. March, it'll be warm by then. So, anything?
When we had at your place, 3 hours is a long time.
3 hours is a long
It's a
time.
long time. That one we had at church was really nice.
Yes,
I know.
and that was just a 1 hour movie up there.
Yeah.
It took me a half an hour to figure out how to run the DVD player, so it ran a little long. But this is a kind of, it's like a continuing carousel of presentation. You can come in anytime, you can leave anytime. The conversation and the discussion is going to go on. We can pause the movie if somebody has a point they want to make. We don't have to wait till the end. The idea is just to raise awareness and let people vent their feelings on what is going on. So much of this is buried in this country, and what we're seeing now is it's being intentionally buried. I've got some comments I'll make during the Joys and Concerns in more conservative states. Well, the one thing you can say is, let me just say it right now. How many of you are aware that the legislature, the Republican legislature in the state of Missouri, just made it completely legal for children to carry guns in public? The police in St. Louis stopped a 14-year-old kid carrying an AR-15 down the street and said, you can't be doing that. And they appealed to the legislature, and the legislature said, yes, anybody of any age can carry any gun openly in Missouri.
That's suicide.
It's crazy. This is in Missouri and St. Louis, where the neighborhoods are not the best, and it's bad enough when they have concealed guns, and now they're carrying machine guns down the street.
Worse than the Wild West.
It's worse than the Wild West. If you remember all the stories of Tombstone and Dodge City, did everybody see Back to the Future 3? When they rode into town, what was the big sign? No guns in town. Everybody had to, and this is what it was in all these towns. They gave up their guns. Nobody was allowed open carry when they came to these western towns. We're far more dangerous than the towns of the West during the Wild West. So we're kind of digressing here. But anyway, what has happened is it's now illegal to read books in school, according to the dictates of the school board, but it's legal to carry guns in the street. So what does it say about our country when books are illegal and guns are legal? So just a little comment on the side. I guess you can guess what my politics are. All right. Our welcome is 420 in your hymnal, and we're glad to have Derek with us today. And the nice thing for me is when Derek comes, he picks everything out and gives me all the numbers, and all I have to do is plug it in. So it's like a vacation day every month. 420. We are here to abet creation and to witness to it, to notice each other's beautiful face and complex nature, so that creation need not play to an empty house. Annie Dillard. And I guess we need to say our focus this month, or this week, is on Charles Darwin. And it just so happens, probably not totally by coincidence, that the 12th of February is Charles Darwin's birthday. So,
And
yes.
in the same year, Abraham Lincoln was one of the 12.
Really?
Because they share the same date of birth.
February 12th is Lincoln's birthday. That is
1809.
that is pretty amazing. And
Just
actually,
in case
it's pretty
you wanted to know.
it's pretty amazing when you think of Lincoln and Darwin inhabiting the same universe. That's something I had never really put together before. Some of these coincidences are pretty earth-shaking. All right, our prelude, and we're doing the kind of a attachment to Burt Bacharach. So Lloyd's going to play some of his songs. Burt Bacharach, I'm sure you know, has just died. A monumental producer and writer, and just kind of an author of American history. So, but what we're going to hear now is Just a Closer Walk with Thee. I think there's some gospel jazz roots in A Closer Walk with Thee. All right, our chalice lighting is in your hymnal 453. May the light we now kindle inspire us to use our powers to heal, not to harm, to help, not to hinder, to bless, not to curse, to serve you, Spirit of freedom. That's the Passover Haggadah. All right, our opening hymn, number 12. O life that maketh all things new. Is 460. The line in life, nature, science, philosophy, religion constantly returns into itself. The opposite poles become one when the circle is completed. All truth revolves around one center. All is a manifestation of one law. Sarah Alden Ripley. As we talk about, Darwin is our feature for today, our slide feature. I'm sure many of you know the origin of the species, and one of the prominent parts in that was the thrush's beak that gradually changed, adapting to the food supply there. So that's what this picture is on. And we're going to hear a children's story that is also based on Darwin.
History in a nutshell. Who was Charles Darwin, you say? Only one of the most famous scientists in history. He was the first person to explain the fundamental scientific theory that evolution is caused by natural selection, and that humans and animals share common ancestors. It was a groundbreaking idea that caused huge controversy in Victorian England and changed the way we think about the natural world. Darwin was born into a wealthy family in 1809. His dad expected him to become a doctor or a priest, but at university, Charles was much more keen on the world around him. He helped name plants at the University Museum, debated natural history, learned how to stuff birds, collected beetles, and much besides. At just 22, Darwin set off on a round-the-world voyage that took him to South America, Australasia, and Africa. It wasn't your average gap year. Darwin didn't come home for 5 years, and the things he experienced on his voyage influenced him for the rest of his life. He ventured into dense rainforests, climbed mountains in the Andes, and explored the Galapagos Islands, collecting and observing plants, animals, and fossils along the way. He joined the carnival in Brazil, and even got caught up in a rebellion in Uruguay. It was quite the adventure. When he eventually arrived back in England, Darwin began working with other scientists on the findings from his voyage. He published his diaries of the trip in 1839, and became one of the leading lights of London's scientific society. Darwin's health got worse around this time, and he'd suffer from illness for most of the rest of his life. But his personal life wasn't all bad. In 1838, Charles married his cousin, Emma. The couple started a family, and in 1842, she convinced him to move to Down House in Kent. The gardens at Down House were the site of many experiments. Charles bred fancy pigeons, studied the flight of bumblebees, and grew all sorts of varieties of plants. He and Emma were much less strict than other parents of the time. They encouraged their children to play and explore the world around them. Charles carried on publishing respected books and articles on everything from geology to botany and barnacles. But behind closed doors, he was also working on theories that would rock Victorian society. From as early as the 1830s, Darwin had been trying to answer difficult questions about the natural world. But he knew his theory of natural selection flew in the face of accepted religious ideas about creation, especially because it meant that humans evolved from other earlier animal species. Eventually, in 1859, he published his famous book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. It caused a lot of controversy, but it gained lots of support too. Darwin's health was getting worse, and so he stayed out of the public eye. But his friends and allies defended his work. Many new editions came out, and the book was published throughout the world. For the rest of his life, Darwin carried on working and writing at Down House. He published more books and carried out more experiments with plants and animals. All of his work was designed to test his grand theory of natural selection. He died in 1882 and was buried in Westminster Abbey as a national hero. His theory has been scrutinized and developed in the 140 years since, but his ideas and life's work still form the basis of how we understand the development of the natural world today. Cheers, Charles.
Cheers, Charles. 140 years, and we still have a creation museum in Kentucky. So his ideas are not fully accepted all over, well, actually, not only Kentucky. I'm sure right here in Darke County, there are outshoots of the Creation Museum. So the work goes on. Any comments, questions on the little presentation there? I always love those. I love the way the English pronunciations do. All right, joys and concerns. Yes.
I think we have to start with deep concern for the people of Turkey who are trying to make a life in the aftermath of the earthquake, and Syria, and have lost so many loved ones.
More than 27,000 at current. I think the estimates they're going to double. I think this is going to be one of the worst earthquakes in the Turkish and Syrian history. They had a terrible one back in the 90s where like 30,000 people were killed. I don't think there's any doubt. But what this one is going to surpass the damage and the destruction that one did. And then the discontent that comes with it, the government that didn't enforce the housing standards. If you saw the aerial pictures, blocks and blocks of houses just collapsed down to the ground. And they knew that this is an earthquake zone and it was coming. And of course, we'll write a separate candle for Syria. The sad thing about Syria is Syria has undergone a civil war. It's still in control of Bashar, whatever the guy's name is, who is a dictator and has caused all kinds of problems, and only wants the aid for the Syrians to come in through Damascus to the government-controlled areas. He is withholding aid to the rebel areas. And not only is he withholding aid, the last report I saw, they are still attacking, they're still bombing these towns that have been hit by earthquakes, are still being bombed by the Syrian Air Force. It's just, it's unspeakable, the destruction that people can do to each other, and I have no answer for that. Yes?
I'd ask us to light a candle for a friend and colleague of mine. He got the news from his dad this week that his dad's been diagnosed with pulmonary fibrosis, or fibrosis of the lungs, and there's really no recovery from that. It just progressively gets worse, and it's kind of a frightening diagnosis to have a loved one face.
Yeah, you basically die from asphyxia. Your lungs just fill up with fibroids, and the oxygen exchange doesn't take place anymore, and plus the fluid and the mucus that builds up. They are coming out, I've seen some new things about new treatments that hopefully will prolong life with a better quality of life, so our thoughts and prayers, hearts and minds are with that family. I've got the picture of the teenager in Missouri with a gun. I also have, I gotta show you this one. Probably nobody has seen this one. This is a lawmaker from Brazil whose mother had to have an MRI, so he took her to the hospital. He's very prominent in the open carry, no guns, guns anywhere, and you can't take my gun away from my cold dead hand. Does anybody see where I'm going with this? Anybody know what happens in an MRI, what the big warning is on the door when you go into the MRI room? The MRI is a giant, and I mean a giant magnet that goes around in a circle outside of your body and takes very fine pictures. It is an extremely strong magnet, and people are warned in sign of disclosure and everything else, do not take anything metal, belt buckles, coins, anything has to be out of your pockets, because when you step in there, it'll be drawn right to the magnet. And if it's in your clothes, it'll pull you right into the magnet unless your clothes rip off. So what did this gentleman do? He was never going to give up his gun, so he walked in the room with his handgun in his waistband. The magnet pulled the gun out of his waistband and pulled the trigger and shot him and killed him. So this lawmaker in Brazil died from walking into an MRI room with a handgun after he signed the disclosure that says no metal in the room. Does anybody know what the catchphrase is for Darwin? You ever heard of thinning the herd? This is the Darwinian survival of the fittest, thinning the herd. That's when the less fit don't survive and slip to the wayside. Carrying a gun into an MRI qualifies you as less survivable or less fit. Yes?
Did that just happen?
Yes, that just happened January 29th. I kind of cruise the news, so to speak, and pick up, I have like a magnet myself for all these little weird tidbit things, like the Missouri legislature passing that law, like this guy in Brazil. I feel sorry for his mother, who was standing right there beside him. I feel sorry for his family, but I don't understand a lot of the thinking of these people, and I don't understand that one. This is the other one. We need to keep Ukraine in our thoughts and prayers, hearts and minds. You won't recognize this because it looks like part of the United States too, but this is a reservoir in the Ukraine that irrigates almost 2 million acres in the southern Ukraine. The river that divides the Russian-held area from the Ukrainian-held area has a dam across it. On the Russian side of the dam, to punish the Ukrainians, the Russians have opened the sluice gates. And the reservoir that creates power, that creates water for irrigation during the summer, the reservoir is almost dry, so there will be no irrigation in the summer and no power generated from this dam. The Russians have been open since November. They're draining the reservoir to punish the Ukrainians. Survival of the fittest, stupidity to the nth degree. The other half of the irrigated acres is in the Russian-controlled farm area. So not only are the Ukrainians not going to have any irrigation water, the farm area in the Russian area is not going to have any farm water. It's not going to have any irrigation water. Sometimes people do things, we used to call it cutting off your nose to spite your face. It does not seem to make any sense. I do not have an answer for that. It's just one of those things that we hope some kind of resolution will come to that situation. All right, let's see. The other thing, I've got a couple minutes. I went to, yes.
A little closer to home, or at least to my heart, we have a dear friend in the Philadelphia area who had chest pains on New Year's Day, ended up having open heart, and then a valve replacement, and then she couldn't, a whole series of things. She went home yesterday.
Oh, excellent.
So it's been a long month, but that's certainly good news for us. Regina Doyle.
Regina Doyle. Our hearts and minds are with Regina and her family. And with the medical, as much as we wonder whether progress is being made, people who would have died 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago in Darwin's time are still alive and prospering because of the medical advances that have been made, because of the advances of science. So let's please not look down our noses at science and deny science. It does a lot of good that some people don't even realize. All right, the other thing I want to mention briefly is I go to the Democratic meetings every Sunday or every month in Darke County. We meet at Jack's Cabin on a Saturday morning for breakfast. We always have a speaker. Last Saturday, the speaker was Jim Beakey. If you're familiar with Jim Beakey, was the representative for this area. Everybody knows Jim Beakey. He is the perfect politician. He was in a Democratic area, but he wasn't fazed at all. He has a self-deprecating. He tells jokes about himself. He has a good sense of humor. He reaches out and hits all those little hot buttons: patriotic, family. The important things, the great thing about living in Darke County and the agricultural county, and he contrasted it with other things that are going on in the state. And it was an interesting, and the reason I'm talking about it is, and the reason it struck me, was the smooth way that accomplished politicians can present their argument and disparage other people without really disparaging them. In other words, he would talk about Darke County, everybody has two parents. Kids, when they go to school, they know how to work because they've been doing chores since they were 7 years old in the barn. The family is responsible. The family sticks together. All the things that we too think is positive about rural life, about living in Greenville and Darke County, about living out in the country. But then he contrasted it about how terrible it was to give people things in the city, and how terrible it was down in Dayton and Montgomery County, where the kids come to kindergarten and don't know their last name, where the teachers have to tell them their last name because there's so many men in the house, and all their brothers and sisters all have different fathers, and how people are given things so nobody will work. And he wasn't saying he was prejudiced, he wasn't saying he was racist. He is founding and is a big supporter of FFA. I'm a big supporter of 4-H and FFA. He is trying to start FFA programs in the inner city schools to help inner city kids become farmers. Let that sink in a minute. And I was asked by the people at the meeting to keep my big mouth shut, so I didn't say anything. But my question was, I was a farmer. I kind of still am a farmer. I milked 50 cows, had 100 cows, farmed 300 acres of ground, and I was basically being pushed to the wall. If my dad hadn't been a rich veterinarian and bought all the ground for cash, we would have been in serious trouble trying to borrow money to keep our farm going. He has engineered. He was also the head of the assistant director of the agriculture department in Ohio for a number of years. He engineered taking the control of farms away from the EPA, the expansion of farms away from the EPA, and putting in the agriculture department. So he was really very proud of the fact that we can thank him for all the hog farms, all the 5,000 cow dairies, all the 10,000 cow dairies. I didn't ask, but I wanted to. Can we thank him for this condition of Grand Lake St. Mary's, where it's basically an algae pit from all the manure that comes on? So anyway, it's something to think about, and these people, and I hate to say these people because that's a prejudiced tone, but people have an ability to fool themselves into thinking what you believe is right, and I have that same thing. I want to be open, so ask questions, bring up points in opposition, and let's see if we can all get along. One of the best things about being a politician the way Jim Beakey is, I found something to congratulate him on when they brought in the new racinos and casinos in Ohio and legalized gambling. The casinos didn't want to have horse racing because they lose money. They don't lose money, but they don't make as much money on horse racing. Jim Beakey, coming from Dark County, said everybody has to have horse races, even if it's just a minimum amount. So in Dayton, at all the casinos, they all have horse races. That keeps the harness business going. So I congratulated him and thanked him for his effort to do that. Even though I've never made a nickel out of it, I'm still happy to be part of the horse racing business and happy to have a horse involved in it, and happy to support it with the thousands of dollars I spend on my horse. So, all right. Any other joys or concerns, or any comments on my comments? All right, for those joys, concerns, thoughts, prayers, those fears, those unnamed and maybe unknown thoughts that kind of hide in your heart, we are here if we can help, and we can do anything for you. All right, our message, The Misunderstood Man by Pastor Derek. Now let's go back to, I forgot to mention that. The newest thing, can you see this? How old do you suppose he is? He's got to be at least 14. You see the sign here? Hey, parents, do you have a 14 or 15-year-old? Ohio and many other states are now weakening child labor laws. So if you're 14, you can be running the cash register at Burger King. And they also said you can work more hours on school nights and you can work more hours on weekends. This is what they call devolution. Evolution is when you increase and you become better and better. Devolution is when you go back, you're running backwards. We used to have child labor when kids worked in factories. Now we're having the same thing is happening again. 14-year-olds working in our food factories.
That's better than miscarrying a gun.
Okay.
Well, as I do each time I'm here, I want to say thank you to the El Dorado congregation for giving me the freedom to come up here and be in ministry with you. And it's also a blessing to drive up from Richmond on a day like this, because it's an incredibly pleasant drive on a bright, cold, sunny morning. The reading selected for this morning is from the book of Proverbs, chapter 3, beginning at verse 13. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit is better than gold. She is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, in her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness and peace, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life to those who lay hold of her, and those who hold fast are called blessed. So, there is this persistent but very common, I'll call it foolishness, that somewhere in our past was this golden age. Back then it was better, and it was more civilized, and there wasn't any conflict. Now, I can say that I do not like our current politics, and I really dislike most social media, and I find the U.S. tax code a fathomless abyss of complexity. Clergy taxes, just so you know, are weird. They're not normal. They're weird. We're employed and self-employed simultaneously. I'll tell you more about it later. But when people tell me how much better life was in the past, and especially as I start looking further and further into the past, I want to remind them of one irrefutable truth about why I prefer today over what the world was like, say, 100 years ago or more. You might think, 1923 couldn't be that bad, could it? Well, thanks to scientific advancement, and at least for people of adequate means in North America and Europe and Australia and Japan, we enjoy a privilege seldom granted to any other group of humans through time or in other parts of the world. Most of our children will grow up. I want that to sink in. Most of our children will grow up. We will not lose significant numbers of our children during their infancy or grammar school years. We are far less likely to sing the old hymns composed specifically for mourning the deaths of children. There is a whole set of musical history involving hymns that were composed around the deaths of children. We will not need to see, as my grandmother did in the 1920s, one sibling killed by the measles and another by influenza while she was still a child. We will not need to hire the specialist photographers who used to exist, who once upon a time, their niche was taking final photos of deceased children. A final memento for families whose beloved was caught short by death. It explains to me why my mom's mother, I didn't realize this, I always thought it was a little weird. My mom's mother always took one last photo of the person in the casket at the funeral. I never understood that, but she grew up with people who professionally did that. Our ancestors suffered, all of them, including kings and queens, industrial barons, lawyers, even professional physicians. I bring this up because it relates to our occasion for today. February 10th through the 12th is designated by the Clergy Letter Project as Science and Religion Weekend, and probably because Charles Darwin's birthday, turns out, falls within this time period. The Clergy Letter Project exists to promote dialogue and mutual understanding between science and religion, and a coalition of Jewish and Protestant clergy are mutually encouraged to use this weekend to take up a challenge of preaching on some topic related to science and religion. And today I bring you Charles Darwin, one of the most misunderstood people in the history of the Western world. Now, the common legend, and the little video touched just briefly on it, was that Charles Darwin had planned for a career as a country Anglican priest before he set off on the Beagle, and then made a bunch of scientific discoveries, and then, because of evolution, became a proponent of anti-religion. But the idea that science led Darwin to some kind of apostasy combined with biology can't really be sustained on his own recorded history. And the truth is that Darwin really never committed to theology as a calling. His diaries show that even as a young man, he had very little theological curiosity, but a lot of curiosity about the natural world. And that was also featured in that little video you saw. Nice way to prime the pump, Tim. His curiosity
about life as a country pastor arose from what were an absence of options by which a person could professionally satisfy their curiosity about science. In the early 1800s, there weren't many people who were professional scientists. Those jobs really didn't exist. But there was this phenomenon during Darwin's life that in England, a country pastor could also double as a naturalist, as they called them back then. And there were a number of these country priest/naturalists who spent their time publishing books on beetles and illustrating plants and engaging in semi-professional astronomy. Just get your little telescope out there and look up. And so it looked like a good option. But as life had it, Darwin got a position on the HMS Beagle. It allowed him to sail into adulthood and evidently some really interesting adventures. But he sailed into adulthood with some financial means, a good scientific reputation, a happy family, and a rather conventional involvement in the Anglican Church. But in 1851, life events far removed from his scientific research would cause him not to become anti-religious, but to arrive at a set of unconventional religious convictions. Charles Darwin and his wife Emma had a daughter named Annie, who Darwin loved with a just sweet, sweet devotion. He loved all his children, but he loved Annie a lot. Now, Annie was always a bit sickly, as they termed it in that time period. Never really quite thrived. Was prone to illness after illness. In 1851, Annie became so ill that Charles and Emma sent their daughter to a private clinic at a place called Malvern, the kind of place that eventually would be called a sanatorium, as opposed to a sanitarium. Annie's older sister moved there with her to provide some support. Charles would travel to Malvern at a regular interval and stay with Annie for days. And Emma, who was pregnant during much of this time, followed the customs of that time and largely stayed out of sight at home. Annie prospered for a little bit under a course of specially prepared meals and spring water, but eventually Annie took a turn for the worse. She became violently ill. Charles Darwin traveled to be by her side, and Annie died in terrible pain on April 23rd of 1851. And after her death, Charles wrote to his brother Erasmus, "God knows we can neither see on any side a gleam of comfort. Oh, that she could know how deeply, how tenderly we do still and shall ever love her dear joyous face. Blessings on her." Annie's death crystallized for Charles Darwin a number of unconventional religious thoughts regarding God and religion. He now concluded with clarity that God could not be both all-powerful and all-loving at the same time. Either God was all-powerful, but not all-loving, or God was all-loving, but not all-powerful. But he never concluded which way to complete the equation. Theology was just not something he spent a lot of time pondering. But his experience with Annie was the source of his theological equation. And no matter if you agree or disagree with him, I hope we all can understand and sympathize with his loss and the questions that it raised. In 1860, writing to his friend and colleague, the Harvard botanist Asa Gray, Darwin laid bare his theological convictions. It is probably one of the few places where Darwin gives a very clear theological statement. And he wrote, "With respect to the theological views in your question," so a question that Asa had asked him in a prior letter, "this is always painful to me, and I am bewildered. I have no intention to write atheistically, but I own that I cannot see as plainly as others do evidence of design and beneficence on every side of us. There seems to me just too much misery in the world. On the other hand, I cannot be content to view the universe, and especially the nature of man," by which he meant human beings in general, "and the nature of man, and conclude that everything is the result of brute force. I'm inclined to look at everything as resulting from divine laws of nature, with the details, whether for good or bad, left to the working out of what we may call chance. Not that this notion satisfies many. I feel most profoundly that this whole subject is just too difficult for the human intellect. A dog might as well ponder the mind of Isaac Newton." So before we conclude, or at least move into the dialogue, there is a story about Charles Darwin's own funeral, and it has some symbolic importance. Now, Charles Darwin wanted to be buried in the Anglican churchyard of his adopted village of Dawin. And so again, the stereotype that Charles Darwin was somehow not religious. He, even with his unconventional ideas, continued to participate in his local Anglican church and gave very generously for its support and charity. And he wanted to be buried there. But a few of Darwin's well-placed friends, led by the younger evolutionary biologist Thomas Huxley, lobbied for something a bit more grand. They wanted Charles Darwin buried at one of the holiest sites of the Anglican Church, Westminster Abbey. And Darwin rests there today. He is entombed in Westminster Abbey. If you're ever there, you can go and see. And he is literally entombed at the feet of Sir Isaac Newton. Darwin's younger friends argued before Parliament that he should be laid to rest with honors from the Parliament in this holiest of holies, because he hadn't feared to seek knowledge, and that what he found did not negate his genuine sense of religion, even though it led him to conclusions that at the time were theologically controversial. Today, those same conclusions, while thought-provoking and subjects of discussion, are far less controversial. You can find all kinds of contemporary theologians who are pondering that question. Well, what if God is not all compassionate? Or what if God's not all powerful? Now, there's a funeral anthem composed for Darwin's funeral. I'm told it is a decent choral composition, although I was never able to find anywhere on YouTube a recording of it being performed, which makes me think it is not very frequently performed. The composer chose one of the greatest biblical wisdom texts, and I can't imagine a more appropriate set of verses both for Charles Darwin and for his life, and also for the idea that a full life, a very full life, requires reflection and a wise consideration of life's complexities. Blessed is the one who finds wisdom and the one who gets understanding. For the gain from her is better than the gain from silver, and her profit is better than gold. Wisdom is more precious than jewels, and nothing you desire can compare with her. Long life is in her right hand, and her left hand are riches and honor. Her ways are ways of pleasantness, and all her paths are peace. She is a tree of life. For those who lay hold of her, those who hold fast are called blessed. So now the fun part. Your thoughts, your questions, this dialogue we have to further explore the message and the theme of the morning. Darwin's history is something that I find very fascinating, so if you are curious, I might know the answer. I'm not going to say it's encyclopedic up here.
This is only kind of related.
Mm-hmm.
There were two women on the Dorset coast of England who kept finding these bones.
Mm.
This and people had for years because there are cliffs there and they erode, and so they thought they were alligators or something. Well, these two women, I think their father might have been an Anglican cleric, thought there was more to it. So they proposed the idea of dinosaurs, extinct creatures. And this was, I think, shortly after Darwin or during the Darwin.
And I can't remember the name. I want to say it was a younger, older pairing. And what they discovered that was like, oh, these are not like alligators who got stuck in the... This is something that was alive in the past and is not around now. They found a complete ichthyosaur just weathering out of the cliff. And if you've ever been to a natural history museum, an ichthyosaur has fins and a very fishy-looking tail and these huge eyes and a long snout full of tiny teeth. It looks like what you would get if a lizard tried to be a dolphin. They're amazing fossils to ever see. But that was like, these women found this.
And what was interesting, I thought, and it's Darwinian reaction to this, is people did not want to believe that God ever created anything that ultimately went extinct. Everything was created as is, as you know it today. And, ultimately, dinosaurs have become, and fun. But they've got a real difficult time being heard by the male scientific community, and they ultimately were proved right. But what I thought was interesting was that religious reaction that there can't possibly be extinct animals because God made everything and everything lasted perfectly. So
this is fascinating because some of that's there. The history, though, is deliciously complicated. So to give you wider context, in addition to these women finding these fossils, you have these other figures in the 1800s who are exploring. And one of them the last name is Lyell. I cannot think of his first name. Another British naturalist. But he was the one who brought up the notion of deep geologic time. That all these layers of rock would have taken a lot of time to put down. And therefore the Earth must be older than we think it is. And that also we can find, there was a Jesuit priest in Italy who was finding seashells on mountaintops, fossilized seashells. And he's like, it's entirely possible that things that used to exist no longer exist, and things that exist now that are alive did not live in the past. No explanation for why that was going on, but all this stuff is percolating up in time.
It brings out the geologist in you.
Oh yeah. And so what you begin to see percolating up is this notion that life has not always been the way it is now, and that geologic time is very deep. It's longer than we think it is. And what I find interesting is there was in the religious world, like once the initial surprise of it, or people started paying attention, you get this dichotomy in the religious world. And I find it fascinating that in big chunks of the Catholic world, they had less trouble with it than the Protestants did, which is fascinating. With one group saying, you know what? This is not a problem. This shows a sort of progress over time. This change and progress over time. And why are we worried about, interpreting Genesis literally? The story has some kind of value without it being literal. And there were biblical scholars going way back who understood that Bible stories are not always literal. You can go back to Jesus' time, and the rabbis were thinking that Jonah is not a literal story. Jonah and the whale is not a literal story. It's a wisdom story. It's like a parable that Jesus would have told that has a lesson to it. In the case of Jonah, it was don't get ticked off because those people repented. That's a sermon for a whole other morning. Asa Gray, the botanist that Darwin corresponded with, was a deeply religious man and saw this kind of natural order through geologic time as sort of evidence of a naturalistic theism. Like, it's not all chaos. There's a progression. You can see ferns and then seed-bearing plants and then flowering plants and grass. Grass did not exist until late into the age of dinosaurs, which is what took its place ecologically were horsetails, which are not very good for munching on. So yeah, it's a fascinating. I think that part of it is, if you look to these bad reactions. So Copernicus figures out that, the sun probably has the Earth going around it instead of the sun going around the Earth, and people had to freak out. And Galileo discovered that Copernicus is probably right. Not only that, Jupiter's got little things orbiting around it. Freak out. Lyell figures out geologic time. Freak out. Darwin, evolution. Humans do not like being away from the center of things. Theologically, we want to be like the most important central thing in the religious universe, in spiritual reality. And when we find ourselves outside of the center, we get ticked off. The idea that geologic time's been rolling around without us, makes us scared. The idea that our planet is not the center of the universe makes us scared. The idea that maybe we came from other life forms makes us scared. And yet, as Tim pointed out, I think he hinted at, all the medical science we have that we benefit from, it's grounded in biology. Biology does not make sense without evolutionary theory. In the same way that physics doesn't make sense without Isaac Newton. So, sorry, I've rambled. Your brain sufficiently stimulated for the morning? Then I have done my ministry well.
As always. And here's a thought for today. Team has no I in it. There's no I in team. As usual, please put something in if you can, if you wish to support the electric bill and the gas bill and our outreach to fish. And if you need something, please take something out. And we're going to hear Burt Bacharach. What is it?
What the world needs.
What the world needs now. Boy, isn't that the truth? And let's light one final candle for Burt Bacharach. I think it was like 92 or 93 when he died. Tremendous impact on the everyday life of everyday people. Part of the things that make life enjoyable is music. Not just music in church, but music all day long. All right, our closing hymn is 39. Bring, O morn, thy music.
Church
backrack, but still moving in its own way. All right, our closing, extinguishing the chalice is 687. Go your ways, knowing not the answers to all things, yet seeking always the answer to one more thing than you know. Something to live by. John Brigham. All right, that closes our service for First Universalist of New Madison. I hope you have a good week. Stay warm. The virus is still out there. I encourage you to wear your mask when you're in public. Now we are stopping the public support of vaccinations. So if you haven't had your vaccination and are due one, get it now, because before long the government will not pay for them anymore. You'll have to pay for them yourself. I foresee this is just a unholy and an unhappy forecast that the virus will come back again. So, all right, Roberta has brought in banana bread, right? Homemade banana bread, and there's always a frozen coffee cake there for those who don't like banana bread. Have a good week, and we'll see you hopefully again.
Don't forget the Super Bowl today.
Oh yeah, Super Bowl today. We don't have a dog in that fight, so we don't care, do we?
I'll be drinking my beer watching it.
And the postlude, yes, more back rack.